Good morning, everyone. My name is Karen King. I work in the Office of New Haven Affairs here at Yale University. Our office hosts a monthly breakfast on the first Thursday of the month during the academic year. Since this is the last month of the academic year, this is our last breakfast until September. So thank you all for joining us before we launch into the summer. I have a few announcements. First is, as I mentioned, it's the end of the year. Students will be leaving and then we will be going into the commencement period. Our undergraduate residences will close on May 11th at noon. That's for first year sophomores and juniors. Our seniors have to move out on May 23rd at noon. You are all welcome to join us for Class Day. Class Day is part of the Yale Commencement Weekend, and it is the day when we have our commencement speaker. Class Day will be held on May 21st at 2 p.m. on Old Campus. And our featured speaker is Elizabeth Alexander, acclaimed poet. She was professor here for 15 years. She will be addressing everyone, and the public is very welcome to attend. I'll put details in the chat. The following day from 10:30 to noon is commencement. That is a ticketed event, but there is a live stream available. And again, details will be in the chat. And just because we're going into summer doesn't mean that Yale is closing down completely. There are a lot of activities that continue to take place on campus. I encourage you to check out the Yale calendar of events on a regular basis this summer. There are places to go to still, like the Art Gallery has teen and family programs. There are a lot of virtual exhibits and workshops throughout the year, throughout the summer. So I encourage you to come back regularly and check out what Yale has to offer. And I hope you join us. So let's go on to our featured speakers this morning. The first of our speakers is Stephen Naron. He's a director of the Fortunoff Video Archive for Holocaust Testimonies. Stephen has worked as an archivist and librarian since 2003, when he received his MSIS from the University of Texas in Austin. Stephen pursued a Magister in Jewish Studies and History from the Freie Universität Berlin. I don't know, you might give me a 4 out of 10 on that, Stephen. And the Center for Research.
7 out of 10.
Thank you. And the Center for Research on Anti-Semitism at the Technical University of Berlin. Stephen has worked with the Fortunoff Archive for more than 12 years, starting as an archivist. Now as a director of the Fortunoff Archive, Stephen works within the wider research community to share access to the collection through the Access Site program, as well as writing and presenting on testimony for conferences, symposiums, and class sessions inside and outside of Yale. Stephen is also responsible for spearheading initiatives such as preservation and digital access to the collection, cooperative projects with other testimony collections, oversight of fellowship and research programs, and the production of podcasts, ethnomusicological recordings, and the archive's documentary film series. Gil Rubin is the head of academic programs. Gil received his PhD from Columbia University in 2017. He was an Israel Institute postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Jewish Studies at Harvard and co-chair of the Jews in Modern Europe Study Group at the Center for European Studies at Harvard. His research concerns the history of Jews in East Central Europe and the Holocaust and the history of Zionism and the State of Israel. He is currently writing a book, The Future of the Jews, Planning for the Post-War Order, a history of planning for the reconstruction of Jewish life in Eastern Europe and Palestine after the Second World War. And finally, we have Aya Marczyk. She's a Curriculum Development Fellow. Aya has a PhD in European Intellectual History from the University of Pennsylvania, and a Master's in Cognitive Psychology from Bucknell University, and a Bachelor's from Brown. Her research explores how teaching with historiography can create bridges between the work of professional historians and high school history classrooms. As a fellow and director of education at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, she has worked with historians, teachers, and school districts to develop and test curricular materials that engage students in analyzing historical arguments and evidence. She has also co-edited and translated several books that explore the intersection of culture and politics. Aya will be working to bring the Fortunoff collection to classrooms in Connecticut through curricular materials and professional learning institutes for teachers. please welcome the director of the Fortunoff Video Archive, Stephen Naron. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks so much for inviting all of us and for really lifting up the archive. And thank you for all the work that you do at the Office of New Haven Affairs. It's really delightful to be a part of the work that you're doing. So I thought that perhaps I should give a little bit of background and before I hand it over to Gil and Aya. But again, it's really an honor to be a part of this community breakfast. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing now to activate the collection and encourage use of the collection in teaching both locally, nationally, and internationally. Now, the Fortunoff Video Archive has always encouraged use of this collection, both inside and outside of academia by various means, primarily through the development of edited programs, lecture series, and symposiums for teachers. But the path we're embarking on now is really qualitatively and quantitatively different. Now that the collection is completely digitized and available at more than 190 access sites worldwide, we've really entered into a new era. For those of you unfamiliar with the Fortunoff Video Archive, I'd like to tell you just a little bit about our history. And it is the reason why I think we're here today, is that the archive really is a New Haven community project. We trace our beginnings, our roots, back to 1979, when the program started as a grassroots community effort led by volunteers here in New Haven. These volunteers consisted of Laurel Vlock, a television personality at Channel 8, Dory Laub, a psychiatrist and himself a child survivor, and representatives of the local survivor community, such as William Rosenberg, who was born in Częstochowa, Poland, and Jeffrey Hartman, who was a survivor of who left Frankfurt on a Kindertransport from Frankfurt and fled to England. Jeffrey was also a professor of comparative literature here at Yale. So they formed a nonprofit organization, and it wasn't just these four people, but these are the four sort of co-founders that we tend to focus on, but there are many, many other supporters in the local New Haven community, both survivors, children of survivors, sort of fellow travelers. So they formed a nonprofit called the Holocaust Survivors Film Project, or HSFP, and Willie Rosenberg would serve as the president of the HSFP. So it started in New Haven outside of Yale. It wasn't a Yale organization to begin with. It only came to Yale in 1981 when Professor Jeffrey Hartman, who I mentioned, and his wife Renee, who was also involved in the project. She was in fact one of the first four survivors recorded by the Holocaust Survivors Film Project in New Haven in '79. In fact, on this very day in 1979, May 4th, 1979, the first four recordings of survivors on videotape were captured in New Haven in Dory's office. So Jeffrey was the one who brought the collection to Yale in '81, and we opened our doors the next year and have been open to the public ever since. Now, and Jeffrey served as the archives faculty advisor until his death in 2016. So from the very beginning, this project, this collection, was very much a local effort by survivors for survivors. The organization involves survivors and children of survivors and their allies at every level, including fundraising, organizing tapings. They opened their homes and held organizational meetings. And this rootedness in the survivor community was really crucial to the development of the archive, how the methods that we use, the policies that we put in place, and how we think about use of the collection today. And it's also a reason for us to remain very much engaged in the New Haven community. And that's why we're here today. And perhaps more importantly, what you'll see from Aya and Gil, why we're doing the sort of work that we're doing to activate and bring this collection out of the sphere of Yale and into the New Haven community and in the hands of New Haven and Connecticut teachers. Our goal at the archive has always been to listen attentively to what survivors have to say, but more importantly, to provide them with an opportunity to be heard, to tell their story in their own words, at their own time and pace, and to be accompanied by an interviewer that really acts more of an empathic listener. So it's not a traditional Q&A or journalistic interview. The testimonies in our collection are very unusual in that the methodology that's used is very open-ended, centered on empowering the witness, And it's resulted in a wonderful collection of very complex, rich documents that contain detailed accounts of life in Europe in the pre-war, wartime, and post-war period. Really, entire life stories are captured. In that sense, it becomes an archive of the 20th century Europe through the eyes of Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. Professor Hartman once wrote that the purpose of the archive was, and I quote, "to document the tragedy and to show it in its full human detail. We listen to them, try to free their memories, and see each person as more than a victim, as someone who faces those traumas again, an eyewitness who testifies in public." And what we found is that these firsthand experiences of survivors can tell us a great deal about the Holocaust in a way that no other source can. Not only can testimonies provide us with important details of historical events, often undocumented elsewhere, they can tell us, and they do tell us, what it felt like for survivors to experience these events. And that is something that is very difficult to obtain in other sources. Testimonies provide also very unexpected insights that I believe can help the general public and students have a better grasp of the past in general, to connect things that people in the past experience with things we see in our world today. Testimony reminds us, and this is a paraphrase of Faulkner, that the past is not dead. It's not really even past. You see this in survivor testimony. You see just how undead their past can be and its relevance for today. After all, mass violence, racial regimes, ethnic cleansing, these things didn't occur simply emerge when the Nazis opened the first concentration camps outside of Munich in 1933, and it didn't disappear miraculously in 1945. One witness in our collection, Robert S., in his testimony said, he was born in Weissenstadt, Germany in 1927. He said, quote, "Evil does not only reside between the Elbe and the Rhine." And I think that's an important reflection on what has happened since 1945. So as the natural sort of demographic forces have caused us to shift our focus from recording testimonies to activating them, we've started a number of new initiatives to bring the materials out of the archive and into the public sphere. I and Gil will talk about a few. I just wanted to mention two in general before handing it over to Aya. The first is a podcast series, which might sound a little bit unusual since we are a video archive, and the podcast series then reduces these audio visual recordings into audio recordings. But we recognize the fact that this medium, this method of using audiovisual materials was really an excellent way to reach out to an audience that might not encounter these testimonies in any other way. So what we've done is the podcast series, which is called Those Who Were There, takes individual stories of a survivor, an unedited testimony, and edits the testimony into a short program that can be listened to in 20 or 30 minutes. Each episode is accompanied by a set of notes that were written by a scholar, in this case, Samuel Cassow, a professor at Trinity, who's currently our senior scholar, also happens to be one of the individuals featured in the program, as well as his mother. And so these notes really provide extra context and additional readings. So they're really ideally suited for use by classrooms as well, particularly high school classrooms, I can imagine. And that podcast is produced with a number of co-producers who have produced other remarkable series. One of them is Nahani Rouse, who works at Jewish Women's Archive and produces a podcast there. Eric Marcus, who is an oral historian of LGBTQ history and has a podcast, Making Gay History, which is the sort of inspiration for our project in the sense of using oral histories for this type of work. And the series has been downloaded more than 70,000 times. So that tells you that 70,000 listeners who may never have heard of our archive are now engaging with these materials, and hopefully will be encouraged to dig deeper. One other project that we're working on that's an ongoing effort that I also think has both an appeal to the general public, students, as well as a research aspect is our Songs from Testimonies project. And if you go to our website, and I think Aya's dropping a few links now in the chat for you all to see. There's a file there that has a lot of links to these different sources. The Songs from Testimonies project is a project. It's really an ethnomusicological project, but it's also a performance project. So a scholar and musician and composer, ethnomusicologist, Zissel Sipovich, has been tasked by the archive to look through the collection and find songs sung by survivors in their testimonies that are unusual, lesser known, that reveal some, I think, quite interesting aspects of life during occupied Europe. So these songs can really range in terms of their content and origins. Some of them might be folk songs that survivors remember from their local towns before the war. They can be songs that were popular in ghettos or written even in ghettos and camps by the victims who were incarcerated. We can see songs, Zionist songs that may have been sung in the DP camps, the displaced persons camps in the post-war. So it really is a broad collection of materials, and 2 volumes have been then recorded. So Zissel finds these songs, researches these songs, provides additional notes to understand the song's origins, translations of the lyrics, which can be in German and Yiddish and Polish, and then performs the songs in his own interpretation with an ensemble. And you can listen to the first 2 volumes on our website. They're both available along with the liner notes, which you can download and read about each of the songs and some of the decisions Zissel made in terms of creative decisions in performing the materials. And we've had concerts to perform this material at Carnegie Hall, Museum of Jewish Heritage. We had a concert series across Europe. So it really is, I think, an important and meaningful way both to commemorate these individuals who gave us testimony, but also to pull in individuals who may not know about the collection or be interested in sitting with unedited testimonies, but can learn something nonetheless from these materials. So there's a 3rd volume I'll mention that's being produced right now and should be released in June. But those are just 2 of the initiatives that we're working on right now that I think that are particularly relevant for this community and for the educational community. So with that, I think I'll hand it over to Gil, who will talk about our critical edition series, among other things.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks, Karen and Aya for organizing this event. I think I'll pick up on what Stephen said and kind of discuss a few more efforts that we take at the archive to make our collection accessible to the public and various forms of public outreach to bring new interests to our collections. And I'll share my screen in a moment, but I'll start by saying that in academic programs at the Fortunoff Archive, we do a variety of different things. So part of them is organizing conferences, so today, or workshops or other types of symposia. So today, for instance, we're having later today, and we can maybe send the link here in the comments, we're having an event for the publication of an ebook on David Boder's book, I Did Not Interview the Dead. And Boder went after the war and recorded testimonies and then put them out in a book, transcribing them. And the event today invites a few scholars to comment on the book after so many years and bring those perspectives on it. And this is one of the initiatives that the Fortunoff Archive was involved in. So later today, if you can see the link, that is another event that you're all welcome to attend. Another, for instance, conference that we organized also to bring public outreach was, I think, was just last week or a week and a half ago at the Fortunoff Video Archive, and I'll share my screen so you can see a link to it. It is where's the I'm going to share my screen here so you can see the title of the conference was Roma Jews in the Holocaust, an International Symposium. And the vision behind this conference was to bring a group of both Jewish, Romani scholars or other scholars who work on Jewish and Roma history to discuss the intersections between the experiences of Jews and the experiences of Roma during the Holocaust. And the conference was really occasioned by the publication of a new book by Arioskovich, whose title is Reign of Ash, Roma Jews in the Holocaust. And what we kind of I think the main thing was, I think it was a wonderful event. And one of the main things that I kind of tried to bring out there in his book and in the keynote, and I think a lot of discussions that followed kind of emphasized that, was how the history of the Roma during the Holocaust is always seen in comparison to or in the shadow of the Jewish experience. And one of the things that the speakers tried to do during that event, and I think that was kind of the most interesting things, is to ask, rather than looking at them as comparisons, and often the story of the Roma, just the scale of it is smaller than the Holocaust of the Jews, so it's accorded usually a more minor role, is to look at intersections between them and to look at connections. And for instance, how Jews and Roma together after the war worked together on claims of reparations or on other claims of historical memory. There was other type of discussions on, even up to this day, on how different political context creates new alliances between Jews and Roma and the memory of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe or in the United States and other places. So I think that was it was a very interesting conference, and it was kind of a fruitful event in the sense that I think for many of the scholars there, but also for the Fortunoff archive, it is going to spearhead more interest on our part to try to explore this theme question. And we will have, I don't know where that is right now, but we're going to have at some point very soon also another fellow who's going to study the history of Roma, work on the history of Roma in the Holocaust. So that is just one example, conferences and events that we organize at the archive to try to bring, and of course, it is important to mention that we also have Roma testimonies in our collection, and the idea is that this conference was an opportunity to invite people to start to use that collection and bring it more to light, as well as many other testimonies in which Jews discussed the experience of Roma in the Holocaust. Part of it was that both Jews and Roma, for instance, were inmates at Auschwitz. So that is just one example, and that is the conferences that we organize. Another thing that we do at academic programs at the Fortunoff Video Archive is that we speak at classes. So there are classes at Yale and outside of Yale, or other type of public and community events that we go to and speak about our collection, and again try to bring our collection to a younger generation of students, or to kind of invite them and entice them to use our collection for their research during their studies. So just again a week and a half ago, we spoke in a class, in actually a Hebrew language class at Yale, by Professor Dina Roginski. She was a professor. And what we did, I think, what we tried to do there, and again, we try to bring new perspectives all the time to try to connect our collection to some of the more interesting new perspectives that are happening in Holocaust research. So what we did was actually, we kind of drew a little bit on this book that was published by Yale University Press, by Hannah Polin-Gleish, professor at Tel Aviv University. It's called Ecologies of Witnessing: Language, Place, and Holocaust Testimony. Because this was a language class that came and it was invited us to present our testimonies, we tried to see how language impacts that. And we saw many testimonies, 3 or 4 testimonies in which Jews after the war go to Israel and talk about their experience between Europe and Israel. And we kind of tried to explore the question of how does collective memory shape someone's personal memory? So what we saw is that many times people told their own personal stories, and this is one of the themes that Hannah Polin-Gleish explored in her book. People tell their own personal stories or tell their testimony through the perspective that became a national narrative or myth, and they turn their personal experience into something collective. And we kind of watched some of those testimonies and saw how that played out. And then we watched another testimony where actually one of the survivors questions those general national narratives and mythologies, and asks about how their own personal experience is actually different from what the collective expects them to remember. And I think what Hannah Polin-Glei's book does, and what we try to kind of highlight by viewing these testimonies together with students, is how language, time, and place all impact the way a testimony is given. And we try to invite students to view testimonies through a critical scholarly lens, and see how, for instance, the same witness can give maybe different testimonies when they speak at a different time, when they speak to a different audience. This is not to diminish the value of the testimony. This is not to say that somebody is necessarily not telling the truth or lying. It's saying that memory is always malleable and is always impacted by context. And again, part of what we do when we speak in classes is to try to invite students to think critically and think like scholars about our collection. So we spoke about some conferences that we organize. We spoke about us speaking classes. Another thing that we do is we have various fellowship programs, and one of them that we just selected a fellow for next year is the Dory Loud Fellowship Program. And there we invite doctoral students who are working with our collections to be fellows at the archive and kind of try to support the research on this. So, for instance, our last Dory Loud fellow worked on how, using testimonies, he actually was able to discover more survivors from Treblinka than was previously thought, and try to kind of re-examine what it means to be a Treblinka survivor by expanding the category and saying that even people who pass through it for shorter periods of time should be included in that, and kind of was able to write more about Treblinka than was previously possible. And now we're going to have a fellow who's going to work on various survivors who produced feminist perspectives and histories of the Holocaust, and she's going to use some of our collections for that. And one more thing before I talk about our critical edition series is that we also started working on translations. So one of the projects we're working on right now is producing a translation of a major work on the Holocaust in Lithuania that is not available in English. And what we're doing here is working with a scholar and a translator to bring this to English. And this is something that the English language scholarship at the moment doesn't offer access to this type of book, and generally for the kind of newer scholarship that is taking place on the Holocaust in Lithuania. And that book also deals with and relates to many of our testimonies in our collection. But the main thing I guess I want to mention and talk about today is our critical edition series. Do we see our screen? I'm just seeing, do we see my screen? Yeah. So our critical edition series is, a project that we launched, I think 2 years ago or 2 or 3 years ago, at least online, and went live 2 years ago. And the idea is that we invite scholars who are here as fellows or in other capacities, and we invite them to select a testimony that is related to their subject of research and produce what we call a critical edition. Now, critical edition consists of several parts. They write an introduction about that testimony, and that introduction is designed to put that testimony in the broader historical context and in the most latest knowledge that we have in Holocaust scholarly research. So they produce an introduction. We also produce a transcript of the testimony, and if it's not in English, as many of our editions are not in English, it is a translated transcript. And then the final part that we'll watch is also we produce an annotated edition of the transcript, which means that when you view the transcript, when you view the testimony, there are actually footnotes there that help orient and explain key terms, events, etc. And the idea behind this is that I think, as we mentioned before in this class, on how kind of time and place shapes testimonies and this context now, is that oftentimes it requires some level of expertise, or the experience of watching a testimony is enhanced with some level of scholarly expertise in the subject. Often testimonies do not give the full context of what happens, and it's hard for someone who's not a student or somebody from the public to fully understand what is being discussed, or to kind of get enough context without that type of guidance from a scholarly perspective. And the idea here is that we're going to, over time, right now I think we have 9 of those testimonies or more. We have actually, 10 or 12 of them already. And the idea right now is that we will have scholars come here and produce these editions that will invite the public, will invite students to have a critical view into our testimonies. So let me just go into one example over here that one of our past fellows produced. So we have an introduction here that basically takes the testimony and puts it inside in the context of the broader research that is taking place. So if we look at, I'll give just this example here of this Eric Hauser, for instance, testimony that was recently written by Wendy Lauer. So that testimony deals really about the experience of a survivor who grew up and experienced the Holocaust in a town in the border between Ukraine and Poland. And there has been a lot of research, for instance, in the past few years about those borderlands and about how those borderlands were kind of the center point of the Holocaust and the places where the greatest amount of violence took place. And what Wendy Lauer does, Professor Lauer does in this introduction, is basically takes his personal story, the story of Eric Hauser, and places it in the context of what we know today, given the research of the last decade or so about these borderlands, about these specific towns, and how they experienced the Holocaust, how they experienced what is called a double occupation, so first by the Soviet Union, then by the Nazis, and how that impacted the experiences of Jews during the Holocaust. So the idea is that watching a testimony without all that background is going to be it's going to be an incomplete experience. And what we hope to do is through that kind of expose the viewers to a more learned perspective on the testimonies. And then if you actually go here and you want to watch the testimony annotated, you can click on here or at the bottom, and I'll just show another one that we have. And you can start watching the testimony with these footnotes. I'll just show an example. So if there's a name of a town that gets mentioned here, right, we can actually click on that, and you see there's too many windows open, so I can't actually see it right now, but we can click on that and we go down here and we have description of what this is. So if you're watching a testimony and the name of Turchin, for instance, mentioned, you can know that it was a city approximately 190 kilometers southwest of another place she's discussing in Ukraine. Or you can go further down and there's other places that are being mentioned. And for instance, Dovinen, which would be a Yiddish word, which somebody might not be aware of. And the basic annotations explain all those key terms. So this is our critical edition series, and what is interesting in it is that it's a constant work of progress. Fellows come and produce them over time. They take a long time to produce and still some time to go online, but we hope over the years to expand this further and further. So I'm happy later to answer some additional questions about this. But this is just a little bit of an overview between the conferences that we have, the classes, our fellowship programs, translations work that we do in the critical edition series, but some of the things we do at the academic programs at the Fortunoff archive. Thank you, and I'll let Aya speak more.
Hi, thank you everyone for being here. I'm really grateful to be part of this breakfast and really grateful to Karen and Office of New Haven Affairs to organizing it and to working with us to reach the New Haven community from my perspective, especially connecting with students, with teachers. So what I'd like to do, and I want to keep this brief, there's so much to say about curriculum work, but I will share some links. And Gail, can I maybe share screen share, set myself up here. The first thing I'd like to do is just share a link to our latest published curriculum at the Fortunoff archive. So I'll put that in the chat for everyone. And then let me screen share to say a little bit more about the curriculum. Okay. Is that coming through? Okay, great, perfect. Just 1 second. Okay, here we go. So what I'd like to do just in about 10 minutes or so very, very brief, and I'm happy to speak more in the Q&A, is to think about the spirit and the challenge of what we're trying to do as we bring the collection to classrooms, specifically high school classrooms, some middle school classrooms as well. So I'll circle back first to the interview method that Stephen had mentioned at Fortunoff, which is very unique and really powerful in the sense of producing a rich collection of documents that traverse the 20th century in so many different ways. And that method centers the witness, centers their voice, that attempt to really create a space, a welcoming space, empathetic space, where they are the experts in their life story and the listener, the interviewer, is there to be a listening presence, to be the counterpoint to what happened during the Holocaust when there was indifference and lack of help, and then to also clarify, to ask clarifying questions to help the narrative come into being. And this is the ideal. Of course, it has lots of different implementations in our affiliate projects over time, but this method really is at the heart of our efforts to bring the collection to classrooms in this broader sort of challenge that we find ourselves right now with the generation of survivors passing away, the possibility of direct in-person encounters with survivors are fewer and fewer. And this question of how do we bring digital testimony, video testimony into classrooms in meaningful ways, really for decades to come? How do we create spaces where young people can stop and think about this and take this experience of witnessing as part of their life and their participation then in continuing with this memory? So with that challenge, the curriculum that we are building together in community with teachers really anchors itself in three different elements. One is that empathetic listening to testimony. Testimony is at the center of our curriculum work. Then, because part of our method as well was for the interviewers to really prepare themselves by historical study, by deep historical understanding of the context, we invite students to do the same, right? To really be anchored in the history as they listen to testimony and conversation with testimony. And there we draw on historical thinking, skills, research, really trying to bring all of that in conversation with how to help young people think carefully about history and expand their ability to think of history as constructed. And then all of our efforts are anchored in community with scholars, with teachers participating together in institutes, in creating the curriculum, and as well as young people. We're inviting them to say, you know, be part of this, help us figure out ways to preserve respectful spaces for testimony for now and for the future. So the link that I shared with you is the link to our race and citizenship curriculum unit, which is online now. We're working on a second one, which delves more deeply into the methodology. And that unit really started with, you know, where do we begin? There's such a diversity of testimonies and experiences. And we decided to start with the testimony of Dr. Leon Bass. There was a podcast also available based on his testimony, because he spoke to an issue that's difficult in Holocaust education, and it's difficult in our own time, which is how to compare historical moments, how to ask about the role of individual experience in the study of history, in historical comparisons, because we're comparing all kinds of historical moments all the time, right, in the political sphere, in the classrooms, and to make that more explicit, to give teachers and students a real engagement with how to do that carefully and rigorously. So we decided to anchor this unit around the question of Nazi Germany in the 1930s, so before the Holocaust, and US Jim Crow era, and the question of race laws. How did these race laws construct the idea of race in the first place? What were the intersections, parallels, connections between them? And how did this affect individual lives? And so let me see if so this is the interface for the curriculum. I dropped that link for you to explore later. And what I'd like to do is maybe just start as we have a moment. So the testimony of Dr. Bass, again, I really invite you to hear more about it. And let me see if I can play just a brief excerpt from it that begins this curriculum and this space of questioning for students. So this is Dr. Bass. He was a soldier in the Second World War. In 1945, he arrived at Buchenwald as the army was liberating it. And he arrived in a segregated army unit. And after this experience, he went back to the US and studied to become a teacher, a principal, and still dealt with segregation, and then got involved in the civil rights movement. And this is him speaking in 1946 after returning from the war, and he's studying to become a history teacher.
And I discovered, though, that the same pain that I left when I left here, the same pain that my father experienced when he came back here, was waiting for me. I came back to this country, and I went to school, and I was walking down High Street with some of my white friends, and we went to a drugstore, and we went in, and they ordered coffee, and I ordered a glass of milk. There must have been about 8 cups of coffee, but no milk. And the lady filled the coffee, put the sugar and cream in, and kept looking for the manager. And finally, she got his attention and beckoned to him. He came over, she whispered to him. And then he called over one of my white friends and whispered to him. And while doing this, looked right at me. And I knew my antenna was up. I had been conditioned. I knew that something was not kosher. And so I waited until finally the fellow came over and he looked at the coffee. He said, "Let's go, fellas, come on." Then he ushered all of us out. And of course, there was some kind of misunderstanding. If the fellow said, wait a minute, the coffee is there." He said, no, we don't want any. I said, "Why?" He said, "They didn't want to serve Leon." Can you imagine? I put in 3 years of my life, put it on the line to make it possible for people like that young lady, that manager, or whoever owned that store to function and enjoy the rights and privileges of the Americans. And they were saying to me, just like the Nazis did, just like they told me down the South, what they told my father, "Leon, you're not good enough." What a damnable kind of thing to say to somebody. And here I am now, 21, and back from the wars, and still can't get that relief that I needed.
So that's Dr. Leon Bass. He's just an incredibly powerful speaker. And we begin the curriculum with this moment from his testimony to pose this as a question to students, to invite them to think about, here's a witness, someone who was there, who experienced different racial regimes, drew connections between them. In another part of the testimony, he talks of Buchenwald as the ultimate endpoint of racism. Right. And then we invite them to think about primary sources, texts, secondary scholarship, to explore the space. What are the comparisons? How do they figure in individual lives? How do scholars analyze connections between these regimes and parallels and differences between them? So the whole unit moves through that kind of inquiry space. And I want to make sure we have time for a Q&A. So I'll just call out a couple of quick elements of this. So we have testimonies from Jewish survivors and emigres from the 1930s. This is John Weil, who was a teenager in Nazi Germany, so experienced the Nuremberg laws coming into effect. We take the text of primary sources, anchored them in archives to support students in deep sourcing of historical texts, of understanding how they live on in archives and the public space. We have used this book, Hitler's American Model by James Whitman, looking at his analysis of the ways in which Nazis studied US race laws, and then that was part of discussions as they put the Nuremberg laws on paper and then into effect. And we have personal stories from Dr. Bass, his experiences in the army, stories from other witnesses as well. And then all the sources, again, on the US side here, we have the 1890 Mississippi Constitution, also linking it to those archives at the Mississippi State Department of Archives and History, inviting students to think about connections between text, testimony, and historical learning. So also a big part of this is saying any curriculum we make, any lesson we make is always incomplete. This is an invitation for students to do more research, to get curious about this. And all of this is sort of driven by what we know works for teenagers and what we try to find out and learn about better. How do we support them in asking historical questions, in doing their own research, in comparing sources and thinking carefully? So with that, I think we're at 8:47. I want to be sure we have time for conversation. So I will stop here and then turn it over to all of you if you have questions for us, or also happy to stay in touch later.
Thank you, Stephen, Gil, and Aya. As I mentioned, we do have some time for Q&A. You are able to unmute yourself, or you can raise your hand, or you can put a question in the chat. Questions or comments? Jessica.
Hi, Gil, you were sharing, in your screen you were sharing, there was also the text that looked like it had hyperlinks or links in it that might have been to footnotes that would be callouts in addition to the callouts within the video. What was that, and how does one find that?
So you mean footnotes in the actual introductory text, or?
Yeah, so you'd shown us the video, the screen that had the 6 or the 10 or 12 videos that had then the text by the scholars. And you might have just put this in the chat here. Let me see.
Yeah, I'll open one and I'll just give an example. Yeah, sure. So I mean, they're all accessible easily through the share screen, and it shows here. So if you go here,
yes, those chat box things.
Yeah, so you just click on them.
Fabulous.
And then you can get access to all the footnotes that they create. Yeah, it was.
Thank you. No, this has just been so exciting to think about ways of sharing information that allow for levels of depth of approach. I work at the Yale Art Gallery, and we think a lot
Oh.
about when we're working with young people and teachers, how do we make something that's at one level visible, but then all these other levels penetrable as people want to learn more. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jessica. Any other questions or comments? Linda, you can, you need to unmute yourself. You're still on mute.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I was part of a little bit working for the Fortunoff archives when I first moved here in the 70s. And it's wonderful to see how it has grown and grown, and in particular for putting together curriculum guides and AV materials for us for the students in New Haven. And after that longing for introduction, I now forgot what I wanted to ask. Oh, do you still have a speakers bureau of sorts? Are there still people that are willing to come in to give original testimonies and speak with classes?
Well, so as far as I know, that's the Jewish Federation that has a speakers bureau and still, I believe, maintains a speakers bureau. The Fortunoff Video Archive doesn't do that per se. So I would reach out to the Federation. And of course, the demographics are as they are. So I know that a lot of speakers bureaus are really struggling with,
Right.
with the loss of living witnesses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Any other questions? My quick question is do you issue newsletters? Is there an ability to join mailing list on your website?
Yeah, in fact, I'll drop the link in the chat. It's the typical Yale email subscriptions link, so you have to register there and then add the Fortunoff Video Archive. But we do have a newsletter. We send out fairly sparse, limited number of emails, so you won't be overwhelmed. We also do have social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, where we'll announce events and as well.
Thank you. Crystal.
Good morning. This topic was, it really hit home. So thank you for meeting with the community and reviewing this information. I came on a little late, and but I believe I heard you state that you bring this curriculum into, is it middle schools, or you're looking to do that? Is that correct?
So the curriculum is primarily for high schools. The kind of grade range is between 9 and 12. And of course, there's modifications for reading and for background knowledge there. We had teachers adapted successfully for 7th and 8th grade as well. So we think of high school audiences for all kinds of reasons, both sort of reading ability as well as readiness for this content. As our primary group of young people, but also extending it to middle school and supporting that as much as possible.
Okay. Oh, that's great. And so, because with this topic, I'm sure it brings some kind of generational trauma. And so maybe I missed this, but is there support that's provided that goes along with this curriculum? So that they have a better understanding of what occurred, and just to help them move forward with what they're learning.
Yes, absolutely. So there is the question, the challenge. I think a lot of the challenge around this is that when students just in a world history class, there's very limited time for them to learn deep background. Right, so we try to build these materials with assuming a minimal amount of background and understanding, you know, that we invite them to learn just a very basic outline from USHMM and other organizations of the chronology of the Holocaust, the scope of the Holocaust. But then against that broader background, then we go back and forth between testimonies and learning more about history. So it's a kind of a iterative process where they would listen, we invite them to raise questions about what else would you need to know to fully understand what this person is speaking about, right? Then we go back, learn more context, circle back to testimony, go to primary sources. So it's a slow building up of that complex knowledge so that by the time they're done with, you know, either a single lesson or the curriculum as a whole, they are stronger in comprehending this time period and being able to think about it and ask more questions about it as well.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions or comments. So I think we're going to wrap up here. I want to thank again Stephen, Gill, and Aya for joining us this morning. Your archives, the materials you share are very impactful. And I encourage everyone to at least sign up for the newsletter, but very much visit the wealth of materials that are posted on their website. So I thank you all for joining us today on our last breakfast for the academic year. I wish everyone a wonderful summer, and we hope to see you in September. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.